you're most well known for the 3 movies that you've written and directed and the novels that you've co-authored with James Patterson.
I think that if you ask 100 people, 100 artists who are working right now, how they got there, I think they would all sort of say the same thing. Keep working as if tomorrow's the day where it's going to hit for you.
What's it like for you being in like a writer's room with other people?
The times that I was in a bigger budget situation, I was really surrounded by very, very smart people. But that is not always the case. I mean, I hate to like piss on half of Hollywood with this statement, but
This is the Writers Are People Too podcast, where writers just won't stop talking about themselves. And so tonight we have with us director, screenwriter, and author Shan Serafin. If you Google yourself, as I'm sure many people have, you're most well known for the 3 movies that you've written and directed and the novels that you've co-authored with James Patterson. But if I were to meet you at a cocktail party for the first time, what would you tell me about yourself?
I'm so unprepared. Great, man. I would tell you, I think I would get you talking about you, man. That's how I get out of these tricky situations. But I just love the art in general, and I prefer really not to. First of all, I don't necessarily believe all of the hype behind myself on the internet. I don't even know if you could call it hype or denigration or whatever you want to call it. But I personally just feel that I'm an artist who is trying to find a way to express. And, just to be real with the scenario you presented, I kind of have a different answer depending on who I'm talking to. I really just try to connect with the asker. Are you someone who has been struggling? Then yeah, like I want to talk to you about it from that angle. Are you someone who's accomplished a lot? Then I'm probably going to be more asking you questions. But yes, I'm a novelist now. I've directed and written in the screen world. I live in Paris now, and I thought it would be a little bit easier for me to do directing work here, and I did a little bit. But it has been a bit of a challenge, it's a long walk from LA. So, but I do hope to get back to that.
Okay. So you've written some books with James Patterson, and as far as I can tell, he's been writing since before you and I were even born, maybe. So as someone who's trying to get my foot into the industry and connect with people, how did you originally connect with him or perhaps other people to start down this path?
Right. So I have a beautiful non-answer for you. It was very indirect. It just happened to be that my manager was collaborating with him on some very large projects and just thought this was a time where I was not actually writing novels. I was only in screen and thought, I wonder if I could connect these two people together. And it was just the brilliance of my manager to have that kind of insight. And what I would want to share to someone is that I think that if you ask 100 people, 100 artists who are working right now, how they got there, I think they would all sort of say the same thing, in that it really wasn't scripted. It didn't proceed along the way that you thought it would proceed, 10 years prior. You didn't go to a specific grad school for it. In most cases, you didn't get through a specific training program. You just sort of put yourself out there in different venues, doing your best at each turn. And then it just happens that one day somebody thinks, and this is a key word and it sounds really dry, but thinks that you're professional enough to be used. And I say professional because I think one of the biggest challenges out there for a lot of people is that they have all of this talent, but they haven't been, I guess, mentored or guided to understand just what that word professional means. And I want to say that it's kind of not what you think. It's not just competent, but it's knowing how to play this game where you really are suddenly, as an artist, like especially if you're a novelist to start, which is a very isolated way of working, but I think screenwriting is a bit more collaborative. You realize that there's many other voices out there, and many times you're not going to agree outright about what the input is on your project or the project you're collaborating on. And I think what makes you finally be professional is to say, how can I synthesize that? How can I take someone's bad notes, notes that I don't agree with that I think could sabotage a project, and turn around and make them amazing notes? I'm not trying to actually say that certain notes I got were that bad in my career, but I think that's the skill. It's an incredible skill to to that we're all working on. It's like, how do you harmonize as an artist when you're dealing with different mindsets? So anyway, again, another long non-answer for you. But I encourage everyone to work through the dark periods where you feel nothing is happening. You even feel that if you were to graph your life, it's actually not even really going up. It's sort of maybe just trending downward. Keep working as if tomorrow's the day where it's going to hit for you and you will be unprepared because of how much you didn't work just that week. In other words, when it comes, it will come and you will be filled with regret. You're like, God damn it, I really should have, I should have put more effort. I should have had more confidence in myself that I would get to this point. Because it's really a lot of nothing, and then something happens and it moves very quickly because people start asking you for, oh, do you have a spec script on this? Or, can you show me your reel for that? Or, oh, can you give me a quick synopsis on that other project you're working on? You don't have all this stuff ready, right? Because you had been doubting for a number of years. You're like, what's the point? What's the point? What's the point? I'm telling you, there's a lot of people who have this particular experience where it's just a lot of nothing, a lot of dark months, maybe even years. And then when it does pop, it pops so fast that you really lament not being as ready as you wanted to be.
Yeah, and to summarize everything you just said, I've heard similar things from lots of other authors. And to paraphrase somebody, it took me 10 years to become an overnight success kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like you have
Yeah.
to work at it. And perhaps there's a little bit of luck, a little bit of connection in there. But like you're saying, if you practice your art, you eventually will make it there. And I think that's the road that we're all on. And going back to the co-writing thing, what's that whole process like when you're co-writing with someone else? I know you've worked on scripts in the writers' rooms as well. So is it a matter of, hey, you write this person's voice and I'll write this person's voice? Is it a matter of collaborating on plot? Like, walk me through that.
Yeah, I mean, great question. I mean, he's collaborated at this point with, Dolly Parton and Tiger Woods, talking about James Patterson now. So, I would bet that he is much more hands-on with them, whereas with some of his other, I guess you could say, more experienced writers, he probably has. I think his biggest thing is story. The guy really likes to be a storyteller, and I think he has felt accomplished in the prose category, so that maybe he would like to give a few of us a chance to put our prose out there, also develop the story a bit with him. So I think we've done about 5 or 6 projects together, he and I, and they're mostly done the same way, which would go as follows. He'll present me with a chapter by chapter summary, which is, like roughly a paragraph per chapter. Uh, if it's a shorter book, it's 25 chapters. If it's a longer book, it's 65. And I then go to it. I bust in and I'll do like one clump at a time, a clump being like, 4 or 5 chapters. And then he'll review, and, he'll have his notes. And sometimes the notes are very, very surgical. And sometimes the notes are just like, great, keep pushing, or let's see more of this character later in the story. And that actually, before we even get that far, it can be very collaborative in the sense that I might say, hey, I got this new scene where this lady's trapped in an attic, and there's some spiders and stuff. What do you think about that? And then we worked on a project once where I was driving through Arizona, and I was just really admiring the cliffs, in northern Arizona. And I was by myself in a car, and I thought, what would it be like to get shoved off the road? Because it's so steep. And I thought, like, well, who's the best person to shove off the road? Well, it would be a mother, and she'd have her kid with her. So we created this whole story together, that is really one of my favorite stories. Anyway, I won't go into that one, but there can be that where I bring something to the table and then he builds upon it. And it was great for me at that point in my career because, you start to find your voice. And so you don't necessarily need someone to come in and tell you what your voice should be. However, you're never quite certain what readers are thinking or what the market is thinking. Especially like, let's say you get through your act 2 and you're starting your act 3. These are like the big, like, heavyweight questions. And you're like, have I set it up enough? Is there an emotional payoff here, or is this too predictable? And to have someone like Patterson on board when he says, trust me, they're going to know this by now, your readership. This is way too obvious at this point, or, blah, blah, blah. that's amazing for someone like me, because those are the questions that, you're just trying to get through in the dark, all by your lonesome in front of your keyboard at 2 a.m., wondering what someone else is going to think about your thing, right? And then he comes
Mhm.
along and he can say these really, really sharp, insightful pieces of commentary. And it's like, it's like an education for me. It's like a training ground.
So going to your film industry experience, now I actually very recently finished writing and directing a short film. I think the director's cut's going to be like 25 minutes, so pretty short. It's a medieval horror, and it was a great experience for me.
Cool. Let's
Yeah,
stop right there. Stop right there. You got my attention. Medieval horror. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Like
So
witchcraft. Like, what are you thinking?
So the script I wrote, there's basically, well, funny how we got to this point. So I had done a short project with the director of photography a few months ago, and he emailed me or called me, I don't remember. He's like, "Hey, I bought this cool sword off Amazon. You want to write a script for it?" So I did. So I bought this. He bought the sword, and it's like a demonic looking sword, and
Of
I ended
course.
up writing a script where this Templar, he's gifted this sword by this monk, and he starts to go crazy, and I don't want to ruin too much, but the sword's basically whispering to him and telling him these things. And medieval horror kind of, keep you on your toes a little bit, psychological kind of thing. That was a
I
blast
love
to
it, dude.
film.
Can I watch it?
It's he's actually in the editing process right now, but as soon as it is done, I will gladly send it to you.
Oh,
Yes.
I'm excited, man. I love this stuff. Go ahead. Sorry,
Um,
I don't even know what your
yeah,
question is.
no. Feel free to ask me about my projects anytime. I love talking about myself. But so that was a great process for me. We're out there filming, walking around fields and forests and stuff. But what's it like for you being in like a writer's room with other people and the big budget stuff that you've been on? Like, just tell me. I want to learn about this.
Oh yeah, it's fortunately for me, the times that I was in a bigger budget situation, I was really surrounded by very, very smart people. Um, but that is not always the case. I mean, I hate to like piss on half of Hollywood with this statement, but you're often playing the politics of a situation and where you're sitting at a table with about six people, maybe two of them are writer types and the rest are sort of the executive producer types. And the executive producers are coming in and one of them just wants to impress the other or just sort of dominate the other by pissing on the fire hydrant that is your script. And they have conflicting ideas. They're like, well, this character should be stronger or no, this plot is too long here. And you actually have to you have to figure out a way to reconcile these notes and make everyone win. I'm not saying I personally can always do that, but that is the challenge as opposed to on the purely indie scene where it's a bit more of the auteur theory, where it's like, the director, or I guess the writer director is sort of the king and queen of the storytelling. Um, it's much more collaborative, but when I say collaborative, especially in terms of LA, it's politically collaborative. And some people are really good at the game. Like there are screenwriters out there just amazing to like read that writer's room, figure out like who's, fucking who here and like who doesn't get to be fucked by who and like, okay, I'm going to write that I'm going to thrust it in this direction and harmonize these notes. It's genius to be able to do something like that.
Mm. Gotcha. All right. Well, let's stop talking about film and James Patterson. Let's talk about you and your solo debut novel, as you put it, The Paris Vendetta. I love that stack of books you have behind you. That's so neatly put. And that came out. When did it come out? Was it last month or 2 months ago?
Yeah, at the end of June, the beginning of July.
Okay, got it. So the Paris Vendetta, you're living in Paris right now. Did you move there for this book, or did you write the book while you were living here, or was it completely
Yeah,
unconnected?
it grew out of being here. Actually, ruined my biggest goal, which was to come to Paris and not write about Paris. I just wanted to come here and just sort of be liberated from really any kind of connection to anything other than just enjoying the city. And I thought maybe that would like free my mind, and it did. But it brought me right back into just like really writing what was happening around me. And I also didn't really want to inject myself into a story. And I ended up doing that because I came from the world of finance in my previous lifetime. So this story the Paris Vendetta is about a guy who's in the banking industry and comes to a conference in Paris. And I've been to a lot of like finance conferences and sort of seen what happens. And I really wanted to expose just a little bit of the darkness that I saw, exaggerated, of course, but just sort of put it out there within the, here's a dry term, parameters of the financial world and see like, who can we murder this morning with a story like that. So yeah, I mean, Paris is very inspiring. Yeah.
Well, so what's the synopsis of the plot?
Yeah, well, so let me first say that one of my favorite types of stories to tell is one in which we are following a protagonist through the POV of a protagonist, and that protagonist is not 100% sure about what is happening to him or her and is desperately trying to work it out as we go. So the Paris Vendetta is, I've always wanted to tell a story just like that about the sex trade in Europe. And the Paris Vendetta is about a regular guy named Adam who is in over his head because he comes to Paris on a business conference and everything goes wrong because he meets a sex traffic victim and he is the worst possible candidate to rescue someone like that. Her name is Katerina and he tries to rescue her and things go violently wrong and the two of them are forced to go on the run together. And he learns that she is not exactly who he thought she was because there's a group of very dangerous people who are hunting her down for a very specific thing she did, hence the vendetta.
Gotcha. Would you say that there's any messages in the book? I know obviously it's a very poignant topic, the sex trade and stuff like that. But I mean, whether it be personal development for your characters or like what are you trying to get across to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, so what is that saying in Hollywood? If I want to send a message, I'll use Western Union. I really didn't want to send a message, but it's the whole story is really based on a look at the patriarchy, for whatever that term means to anyone these days. It was more the role of masculinity within a changing climate because you have this guy who's in sales, financial sales, and is very successful in that little bubble. But that bubble is largely based on, I don't know if you know anything about that world, the sales world, but it's a business of relationships. It's more about golf and beer than it is about finance. And part of that golf and beer often involves sex, at least at the very, very highest levels. People are closing deals in Europe with sex. Sex is involved, like, profit and so forth. So I thought, well, what if there's a guy who's already sort of weak in terms of understanding his own masculinity? Like, I like this came out of like dating in LA for 1,000 years and how hard that is for everyone. But like, what is the role now at this point in terms of relationships and masculinity? How could you take a guy who's so bad at that and then throw him in the worst possible confrontation, which is to literally be up against people who are trying to kill him and trying to kill this girl? And is he rescuing her or is she using him? So if there's a message, it's just more of a question where I'm just throwing out the questions of like, well, what exactly? Because there's a lot of value to masculinity. And I kind of hate that it gets criticized so much, but at the same time, there's some important reasons why we're in the midst of the movement that we're in. And so it's just, posing those questions and looking at it as you watch a guy try to figure things out in the worst way possible.
As you're writing this book, are you keeping the perspective of an American or are you an expat or someone who's, living in France and steeped in Paris culture? Like, how has that informed the way you wrote the book?
Oh man. Yeah, that's a wild question because this book took me a while to develop and get going. I had other projects that I was completing a film while finishing this book. And I would say, I really wanted to capture truly what it's like to be in a foreign country. Now that I live in France and have been here, I think 6 years, and, my significant other, she's French, and so I know the culture really well, I guess. But I certainly know it better than I would have in the beginning. And here's really what I want to say about that. It's really scary to be in a foreign country. It's really scary not to speak the language. And now that I know what France is, which is really, really similar to the United States in terms of laws and how things are done, and culturally it's really, really similar. But I didn't know that at the time. And, I went to Cairo once and I had an argument with a cab driver because the host who was hosting me, one of my college roommates, told me to argue with the cab driver. He's like, you're going to pay him $5. He's going to scream at you, but you insist to pay $5. And I was like, this is terrifying, dude. I'm in Cairo and the guy's screaming at me in a language that I have no concept of. And I literally only have $5. So that was pure terror. I thought I might be in jail by the end of the night or dead on the street. And so, and I'm sure years later, my college roommate, his name is Caesar, is probably just like, oh, you were fine, dude. It's normal there. But you don't know that. So I was really writing the Paris Vendetta from the point of view of somebody who just doesn't know what's happening, to be informed. And actually this character does get pursued by the police. And that's daunting. It's scary when you don't quite understand how the laws work and how the cops here carry machine guns in the street, man. They walk around in groups of 4 and it's just intimidating. You hope that everyone has their trigger discipline. But anyway, no, so Jesus. So here's what I really wanted to say about that. After a number of years of writing this book, I no longer had the perspective of somebody who is a first timer in a place. Like, I was really comfortable here. So I had to constantly, like, creatively crawl back into that headspace of going like, well, what is it that I wouldn't know now? Like, would I call the U.S. Embassy for help? Which, I wouldn't do at this point. Would I trust cops? Are cops corrupt? All that stuff.
Interesting. What are the ingredients to a good thriller?
Well, let's look at what my book doesn't have and just make a list. I think that, and this is not my statement, this is a statement made to me by a very smart person, but the key, at least let's just start with film, the key is execution. The concepts are so similar from between book to book, movie to movie. Like, the concept of a thriller is, somebody dies in chapter 1, somebody dies in act 1, there's a murder. And so how do you keep that entertaining when we've all sort of seen that before? We've all seen serial killer movies. We know that the detective has an alcohol problem and has to track down so-and-so and the partner is. So a lot of it is tropes. A lot of it has been done before. So what makes it good is the execution. In that sense, to me, it means the realism. Because, unlike an action movie where you're entertained by the action itself, and sometimes even if the plot is weak, just a great 8-minute car chase keeps you going, right? Or a horror movie where it's just like, just scare the shit out of me and I'm good. Like, you don't need to be anything profound. Or a comedy where it's like, the laughs are why I'm here. With a thriller, it's like, if I'm not immersed, if I'm smarter than your main character and your main character goes left when it's like, clearly you should open the window and ventilate, you're in trouble as a storyteller when your audience gets smarter than your main character. So it's really execution. It's really having extremely realistic details, trying to make a believable environment, and then taking a character who has to confront this situation in a very realistic way. And yet you as the writer find the arc within it. Like, and the classic arc is escalation, right? Where things are getting worse and worse and worse as we go, but are they getting worse in a believable way? And I think that's the challenge with a good thriller. And I love, like, it's really my favorite genre when done right. And I just feel it's really difficult to do right. Like, I think it's easier for me to enjoy a horror movie or an action movie on average. But thrillers just, you gotta have a really amazing script and solid performances, or if it's a novel, you just have to be captivated by the realism. Just my opinion. I don't know if that's a list of ingredients or just a sob story.
Well, going back to what you were saying about characters making decisions that are more or less intelligent than your reader might make. I've never really written a thriller, but I've one of my manuscripts I recently finished is it's a fantasy, and my main character makes a lot of questionable moral decisions.
Okay.
Would you say that that's kind of along the same line for breaking believability of the character? Would a reader look at that and say, why would anybody ever do that? Or is that like a different dynamic than perhaps an intelligent decision versus a moral decision?
Yeah, great question. I do see them as separate. And I would have said 10 years, especially in the 70s, I think you would have been fine to have, a different set of morals. I think, unfortunately, right now, especially in the last 3 years and probably another 2 years, we're in an era of storytelling where there's a morality police, and they really want a homogenized, like the story you're describing, yours, is great for me. I really don't like morally perfect people, but basically because I've never met one in real life. I like people with flaws. I like my hero to be deeply flawed, and that's rare right now. There's just this cookie cutter imprint of like what we accept as a society in our heroes and our protagonists. So, yes, to some degree, what you're saying is part of walking the line, but I want to say that's temporarily true. I hope that we evolve into an era of a more artistic expression, hopefully in about 5 years, where people are much more tolerant, as in realistic, and accept to read stories or watch movies that involve characters that aren't just these little goody two shoes. Um, but as of right now, yes, you as a creative person have to be very mindful of that if you want to sell it.
Yeah. And I think there's a fine line between having a realistic character, and because people read books, in my opinion, to escape from their real life. They don't want to read about, going to work at their 9 to 5 and what's on
Yeah,
sale at the grocery store. They want to see people making decisions that they themselves might not make. I think that's what keeps people on their toes, as long as they're
yeah,
not stupid decisions like going left, like you said.
yeah, yeah.
um,
No, but that's a great way to put it. Making decisions that I don't get to make. I mean, J.J. Abrams said that he likes to see ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. Um,
mm,
so put someone like me up there in a situation that I'll never be in, and I'm hooked. I'm watching that unfold. Yeah,
mhm.
I think you're right on the money with that.
Moving on to your publishing real quick. Are you traditionally or self-published for this novel, at least?
Uh, uh, Traditional means I have a publisher. Yes, I
Yeah.
have a publisher. Yeah.
Okay. So you have an agent as well. Then I'm assuming that you did
Yeah.
the whole traditional process.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I just started to engage with social media recently. I don't even know if this is where you want to segue. Sorry, hijack. But I have been away from social media forever. Really, I really just it's not something I've engaged with. But I started about 2 months ago because I realized, this was my debut solo, and I had not done any PR with Patterson just because the Patterson empire is, you know what good's a drop of water in the ocean at that point. So now I'm really kind of out there, and I'm on like Instagram threads, trying to see what people talk about as aspiring writers and writers. And yes, I think that the definitions of self-publishing have really evolved. It doesn't mean today what it used to mean logistically 5, 10 years ago. From what I see, it's so much of a it's like, first of all, it takes a lot more skill to self-publish than traditionally published because you're managing, massively different aspects of your career, right? But it's much more doable now. There's a set way of doing it, and you just got to put the work in, as far as I can see. I don't know that I would ever do it one day, and I'll tell you just by an analogy why I would never self-publish. As a director, I made a vow a number of years ago that I would never produce. I mean, my name will be as a producer on certain projects, but never truly produce. I just steal the credit from someone else. But producing and directing for me is impossible to do at the same time. Producing being creating the opportunity for the creative process to happen, and directing being actually, executing those creative steps. I don't have a brain that can do both. And I think when it comes to self-publishing books, you got to market yourself and make executive decisions about like where to launch and when to launch. And I don't think I could actually be creative anymore. I think that what would take over in me is this insecure way of looking at the reception of my work, and it would color my work. It would cripple my work to the degree where I don't think my work would be my work anymore. It would just sort of be this hunt for people pleasing. I mean, actually, that's really kind of the wrong way to phrase it, but it's like I'd be ever pursuing an algorithm in my head about what would sell as opposed to me expressing whatever it is I have to express.
Mm.
So I really applaud anyone who can do that. I have not had success trying it for myself.
Yeah, one thing that I've noticed again when talking to authors, I think you're coming up on being like number 80 or something like that. Like I've interviewed quite a few people, but it's like being a business owner on top of being an author. Like, and I feel like a lot of times the creative persona with the entrepreneurial persona don't always line up perfectly. Now there are people that do have that, but it takes two very different brain functions to be like, okay, how am I going to create a story and characters and an arc and plot that's all engaging and believable on top of let me do marketing and I need to, do a book cover and I need to go do interviews. And it's just
Yeah.
very two personalities that don't always mesh up. So
Yeah.
hopefully I'm one of those people, but we'll see.
Well, hopefully, you're saying hopefully you are one who can wear both
Yes.
hats? Okay.
Yeah.
I hope so too, man.
Well, thank you. Did you want to read an excerpt of your book?
I was not prepared for that. I certainly
Okay.
can try.
If you'd like to,
Um,
that's up to you.
Let me see what I can massacre right in front of your wonderful viewership. Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the beginning. Gosh, this is really, I deeply apologize. Right now, or do you want to give me a few minutes to worry about it?
If you want to take a few minutes, I'll edit it out and you can just like practice for yourself and then we'll come back whatever you want.
No, I want to read it cold. I want everyone to know that this is ice cold out of the fridge. The reason I've never read it is because the audiobook of it didn't involve me. It was someone else who
Mm.
read it. So I was just sort of relieved not to be part of that process. And I haven't been to the States yet, so I haven't done any signings yet. But I'm just laughing at how bad this. I'm a very prepared person, man. I don't like to be. Okay, here we go. So this is the Paris Vendetta, and I'm just gonna read from the prologue, which is page 1-ish. So try to get into character, man. Gotta get the right tone. Let's try this again. Let's look at it from the beginning, doing the math, the physics, the science, the art of launching my chair backward, literally up and backward, to get airborne, shoving myself off the floor as hard as possible to generate the momentum needed to flip over, somehow avoiding a concussion in the process, land on the ground, crack the strut, free my hands, free my legs, then roll to my knees so I could get up and bull rush him. Bull rush, right? That's a thing? To topple, to blitz him, which would stun him, right? Which would give me what, about 2.5 seconds to scramble and yank the knife out of his hands? If he had a knife. He had a wrench. A large plumber's wrench. I saw that much. I wouldn't know what to do with the wrench, obviously wrest it from his grip, but if I could get a knife, if I could give him a knife, I could immobilize him, then undo this rope, then undo this clamp, then undo this nightmare that's got me stuck here, trapped in a basement, somewhere in Paris, somewhere underneath it, where every single aspect seems stolen straight from the depths of hell. A bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, a rusted door, the wet air, the barren walls, an unimaginably harsh location where this guy asked me his question, literally his one question, his only question in the past 5 hours before saying absolutely nothing else. Where is she? He said it with a slight accent, Eastern Bloc or maybe Scandinavian, maybe German, and I'd replay those words in my head repeatedly, pathologically, over and over, analyzing all the implications over and over, chopping up my thoughts into 1,000 fragments, trying to find some way to answer the unanswerable. Where is she? I tried every response. I tried everything I could to convey to him what I had, theories, assumptions, guesses, verbiage, excuses. Where is she? I'd offer an answer. I'd wait again. I'd answer again. I'd wait, talk, wait, panic, talk, panic more, stop, wait again, talk again, over and over. No solution came. No progress was made. Instead, after an eternity, I'd arrived at the sickening sensation that he was now standing behind me on the verge of an exponentially increasing explosion of violence. Where was she? I had no idea. The only thing I knew was that something sinister was smoldering back there inside this unknown man, and a limit had been reached, and an amount of time had run out, and the slow footsteps I was now hearing behind me were the footsteps of an adversary who was approaching me to speak up after hours and hours of saying nothing, after a full day of watching me fail to oblige him, bending toward the back of my neck to utter 5 horrific words, which he hardly raised his voice to deliver. You now have 60 seconds.
Wow. Round of applause. Awesome.
Yeah.
Um, Cool. So I love how you already set up the character. He's a very analytical character, is what I was getting just from you listing his thought processes, and then stuck in a tense situation. And I noticed you started in medias res, so like in the middle of things. Is that how you said that was the prologue? Is that how the book starts at chapter one as well, or is this kind of just setting up for things that are to come?
Yeah, I mean, great observation there. I prefer stories that start in the middle. I just like to jump into things and sort of figure things out as we go. Uh, in this case, the prologue is an excerpt in the protagonist's head of a situation that comes later in the story. So chapter one is a rewind of about 4 days, but that rewind puts us right at the verge of the shoe drop, like where things start to go wrong for him.
And I noticed as well, it was in first person. Is the whole book in first person?
Yeah. I've written for Patterson in first person pretty much throughout. We only deviated one. And I didn't even know it was a thing. I kind of sort of liked the voice. I liked the ability to write in first person, but I didn't know it was so widespread acceptable to be in mainstream novels. Um, but yeah, I think, like there's a lot of interesting commentary on social media about first person versus third, and third being like the more professional or whatever. I think that to some degree it's a cheat to be in first person because it's so easy to connect with the reader and to have that emotional connection. But the challenge is, can you handle multiple points of view? And I do think that there's a number of ways to do it. Not that you have to be a genius at it. You just kind of have to like accidentally figure out what those are. And then you can sort of write in the first person and yet contain another perspective within that. Especially to me, when it comes to quoting dialogue, like you could argue to some degree that a narration could be an unreliable narrator, right? Who is warped and seeing the world not for what it is. But I say, at least in my books, dialogue is always true. So if I'm reading what's in quotes as a reader, I can be assured that that is what is being said in the moment. However, the narration itself might be colored and reflect some sort of distortion on behalf of the protagonist. So that's just my little take on first person. My next novel is actually third person, but I do enjoy the immediacy of first person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're definitely two different styles with two different challenges, sets of challenges rather, and unique to each writer, and then readers take it differently. I think when I write in first person, I tend to be able to be funnier in first person than third person, but I think that's just different skill sets you got to hone a little bit.
Yeah. And how do you feel about handling multiple points of view? Like, let's say, let's take something simple like, a husband and wife having an argument where, there's really two sides to this story and maybe there's an internal narrative for both of them. Do you feel like, I'm comfortable writing first person, let's say you're writing as the husband and you're trying to involve the wife's thoughts that the husband isn't privy to, and yet the husband is narrating the argument, let's say. I mean, have you been in that situation where you've written that way?
I have not. I haven't written a ton in first person. Like I said, mostly some comedy stuff. I think you said that when you're writing first person, the reader knows that the narrator is reliable. I would argue when I'm writing, I think that I bring even more bias to a first person who is thinking, because their thoughts are completely unreliable compared to what is actually happening. Again, to paraphrase this quote, there's three sides to every two-sided story or something like that. There's like what one person thinks happened, the other person then what actually happened. And you can go to a court of law and eyewitness testimonies will contradict each other and neither person thinks they're lying. And that's actually one thing that I do write even in third person is unreliable perspectives of, because I mean, even if you're writing in third person, you're still kind of taking on the perspective of a character, and then you can go to another character and do their perspective. And I'll write sometimes conflicting perspectives of the same event on purpose to show that these two people have different goals and different outlooks on the positive or negative of the same event that happened. So I guess I'll disagree with you on the reliability.
Well, no, I think maybe it could be bad audio on my microphone. I was saying that with first person, it is an unreliable narrator,
Okay.
and that
Well,
the
then we
narration itself you can never fully trust. But at least in terms of my own rules about how I create my books that are first person, I believe what's in quotation marks, because it's
mm,
dialogue, that's my rule, is I will never have a protagonist betray you as the reader with dialogue that was not said. Um,
got
and when it comes to narration, though, all bets are off. Like, this guy could be completely, in a different world in his head. We don't know that yet. So no,
mm.
I think we do agree. We just have bad audio.
Awesome. Well, hey, wrapping up here, any final comments, anything else you want to say about your book or the processes or anything?
No, actually, let me just pose a question that you can pose back to me on that. Like, in general, your viewership, like, what are you seeing out there? Are people hungry to jump into this thing called storytelling? Do you find that there's a lot of people that are interested in self-publishing? Do you find that people are like pursuing ways to become a traditional author? Like, what are you seeing?
I would say more people in general are moving the self-published route. Even to your point,
Mm,
it is very difficult to be successful at it. I think you need to be much more skilled in both creativity and business entrepreneurship rather than finding a traditional publisher is kind of what I'm seeing. But traditional publishing is gate kept by agents is kind of more what I'm seeing. Like
mm,
I
mm.
when I finished my first manuscript, still unpublished, working on it. It's never going to be perfect, right? Um, I think I sent it to like 20 agents and or publishers,
Okay.
which is not a lot in the grand scheme of things. But I've heard
Okay.
of people getting rejected hundreds and hundreds of times, and it's not like an easy process. Like it's not just a carbon copy. Hey, here's my manuscript. Hope you like it. Da da da. Get back to me. You're literally doing a specific cover letter for each agent
Yeah.
and or publisher,
Wow.
seeing what they
Yeah.
want. And so it's very
Yeah.
like I'll spend an hour on each application um for publication, and I only did 20 or whatever. There's people that spend hundreds of hours and still get rejected. Now, going to your point, you were saying earlier, taking notes from people. Sometimes people give great notes on your writing, and sometimes people give poor notes. You need to just take everything that's said to you with a grain of salt. What are you trying to do
Mm,
creatively in your work? Because maybe you have a different vision than someone else might have for what they're trying to read. And then sometimes you do have good feedback. Hey, this sucks because this person made a dumb decision or something like that. So
yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question. Going back to what you were saying about my audience in general, I think my audience is probably mostly creatives. I would love to expand to the consumers as well, because I think there's more value to bring more creatives on here. If the consumers are like, oh, hey, man, I love this author's style or their personality or what they're offering in their books, I want to go pick up their books. But I think right now I'm more catering to a creative audience, trying to learn how to
Mm,
be creative and how
mm.
to get their stuff out there.
Yeah. Well, then let me, first of all, thank you for sharing all that. Let me just say that the one thing I would offer to people who are facing some of the challenges you just mentioned is that you really don't know what note is good and what note is bad. You can't see the forest for the trees, so to speak. It's very hard to know that about your own work and how it's going to be received by someone. What is your goal really? Is it to just, and not that this is anything bad, but is it simply to express a specific idea in a specific way? Or is it that you would like to gather people around a campfire and flood their imaginations in their heads with a vibrant tale? Are you the bard strumming the lute? And both are noble endeavors, right? The expression one and the service one. And what I would say is that you really have no weapon against bad notes, uh, except one, and that is time. If you can work really hard on a project and just edit the fuck out of it, where you get it to the point where it's absolutely perfect, and then you put it in the fridge for at least, I don't know, a month or 3 months. I don't know what the magical number. For me, it's, well, I guess, a month to 3 months, right? For some people, maybe it's a year. For some people, it's less. And then you come back to it and you see how terrible it is and you reshape it and you make it as good as humanly possible, right? I know this sounds really laborious. At that point, that work goes in the fridge one more time. And when you come back to it at that point, whatever you have to say about it is the word of God. In other words, if you feel at that point that your book is good, then it is good. And any note that contradicts that, where it's like, oh, well, I didn't really like your hero, or I don't know about those choices, or I thought Act 3 was rushed, or I'm confused by what happened in here, and you disagree at that point, I think you can honor your opinion over someone else's, or, even if it's a consensus of critiques. I think before that point, though, this is the hardest part about being a creative. Unless you're some sort of autistic genius, it's virtually impossible to write something and to know that it is going to land the way you want. And I'm not even trying to say that it's going to land the way other people want. You don't know yet whether or not it's going to land the way you want until you really perfect it, a lot of revision, and put it in the fridge and come back to it. This is something I cannot stress enough as I've gone out and sort of met people through social media, and I see that, a lot of young, aspiring, great talents out there. I don't see enough of that. I see people working really hard on something, somewhat revising it, and then immediately putting it out there where it's so vulnerable, and then getting critique, and then either surrendering to the critique or giving up on their careers entirely. And it's just like, that was too soon. You have got to take time away from your project, come back to it, mercilessly edit it again, and then at that point, confidently put it out there and agree or disagree with notes based on that version of your own work. And I say this to protect your voice, not to have you cater to someone else, but really that's the only way to protect it, so that you can be confident. It's like, I know I'm long-winded with this, but I'm passionate about this point. If you go away from a project, you come back in a year, you did the whole refrigerator thing for a year, and you revised it once or twice in between. You come back and you read it and you love it. You don't change it, because then it's truly what you wanted it to be. It's your voice. It's your story. And if it doesn't land right now, the era is wrong for it. And what's great news about books, there will be an era in the future. I don't know if that's so true about movies, because, we have the technological aspect of, whatever you just shot, right? But with books, they're truly eternal in that way. So please, I would encourage everyone out there to be confident in that particular aspect of the process.
Yeah, well, then you won't make it till you're dead. So,
Right.
You bring up interesting points. There was, I think it was in On Writing by Stephen King, and I'm going to paraphrase this.
Okay.
He said, the first draft you write is you're telling yourself the story, and the second draft you write is you're telling someone else the story. So it's like you're figuring out what you have to write the first time. I think that was Stephen King. I may be attributing it to the wrong person. I don't know. But going to keeping it in the fridge for a little while, my manuscript I finished in, I think it was February or March of this year. I was like, okay, I'm going to let it sit for a little while. I'm going to send it out to some beta readers. And I'm taking this a little bit too much to heart, because it's been like 6 months and I still haven't touched it again. So I wanted to only give it like 3 months, and I'm kind of being lazy on it. I need to kick my own ass and get back on it. But I think letting it sit is very important, because when you do give things a rest, you come back to it, you see the flaws, the chinks in the armor that you might not have seen when you were originally writing it. So wise words from you.
Yeah, or wise words from Stephen King, or whoever we're plagiarizing there. I think it might have been him. That's a great book, by the way, that you're quoting. But yeah, man, thank you very much. I loved it. I love it. And I got to see this movie with the sword. That's such a Roger Corman way of doing things. Man, I got this old shoe. Can you do a romance story about it?
Well, no, here's the funny thing is the one of the actors, when we were out just in the forest, he came to me and he's like, "Hey, I found this cool stick," and it's literally like a staff that's like 6 foot tall. And he's like, "I'm going to go home and I'm going to make it into a magic staff. I want you to write me a script for this." And I'm like, "All right, well, I guess I got to write a script for this now too."
This is great. I love this, man. All right, well, count me in as one of the first viewers on that. I really want to see it.
Awesome. I will do. Everybody, we had Shan Serafin. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.